much for joining, registering for this session, joining us here today. So we have with us Mr. Amit Agarwal as a speaker for this session. A quick introduction to Amit. Amit is a web geek, is a solo entrepreneur and love making things on the internet. Google recently awarded him the Google Developer Expert title for G Suite and Google Apps Script. He is also a first professional blogger in India. Microsoft awarded him the Most Valuable Professional Award for 5 years in a row. Amit is also the founder of Digital Inspiration that have developed several popular productivity tools, including Mail Merge for Gmail and Documented Studio. The Google add-ons are deployed in some of the biggest companies and universities worldwide with over 1 lakh installation. So thank you so much for Amit for accepting our request and to be the speaker for this session. I'm sure there's nobody else would do the justice to the topic that we have chosen and you being the speaker. So thank you, Amit, and over to you. You can take the session forward.
Okay. Thank you, Shankar. Good evening, everyone. My name is Amit, and I'm delighted to be part of this session on app script. And so many people have joined, so this is going to be an exciting one. In this session, I will be talking about Google Apps Script. This is essentially a language development platform that lets you do more with Google Apps and services, Google services, including Gmail, Calendar, Sheets, Google Drive, Docs, Google Platform, all the essential Google services that are part of Google Workspace, and even services that are not part of Google Workspace. So essentially the plan is to help you be more productive so that you can automate your tasks that you do every day and spend more time doing things that you really love. So Shankar has already given a brief introduction about me. So I've been in this space for almost 17 years. I started as a computer science engineer in one of the Hyderabad companies that's called ADB, stayed in Hyderabad. I know a lot of you are from Hyderabad, so I used to work in ADP Hyderabad. And after that, I quit my job and launched this website called labmod.org. That happened in 2004. So this happens to be a technology how-to website where I publish tech tutorials and tips, and it's been around for 17 years now. Microsoft gave me the MVP thing. Currently, I'm a Google Developer Expert. And the main business that I have is called digitalinspiration.com, where we are building workspace add-ons that help you do more with Google services, again, like Gmail, Google Sheets, and so on. So that was a brief introduction about me. You can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/labnol. So coming to Google Apps Script, now before this is essentially a one coding session. So, and this would require some basic knowledge of JavaScript before any of you can get started. Because if you are completely new or if you haven't written any code before, you might have some problems, because this session is that you have a very basic knowledge of JavaScript. Okay. So what is Google Apps Script? Now, if I were to use in a simple English, Google Apps Script is essentially a JavaScript-based language that lets you work workspace applications. So the benefit of it is that online development platform, you can quickly start without even having to worry about setting up work and setting up servers. All you need is a Google account and a web browser, which all of us have anyway, and you have everything that you need to get started with Google Apps Script. Now, a bit of history would help here. So Google Apps Script has been around since 2009. There was a Google engineer named Mike Ham who created this technology in 2009 as part of his 20% Google employees have, they can work on their projects that they love in 20% of the time. So this is when Google Apps Script came into being. And since then, Google has been continuously improving this language, and it has grown to now support all the modern JavaScript features. and it's almost at par with the current version of JavaScript that all of us use. And it can now connect to almost every Google services that you can think it's possible to connect with Google Apps Script now. Now, one more thing, Google Apps Script is based on the latest edition of JavaScript, but still it is a server-side language. So it doesn't run in your browser. So even though it supports most features of JavaScript, it doesn't have access to standard HTML5 APIs. So to give you an example, for instance, you cannot use Google Apps Script to say resize your browser screen, or you cannot use it to interact with cookies in your browser. To give you another example, you cannot use Google Apps Script to get the current location of a user using, say, something like the HTML geolocation API. So with these limitations you're aware of, the primary reason why this language was created in Google was to extend Google services like Gmail and so on. And it works really, really well in doing that. So before we jump into the actual language, it's a good idea to, to understand the capabilities and the various possibilities that you can do with language. So if you've never worked or if you've never heard of Google Apps Script before, here are some possible workflows and scenarios where this language and development platform really, really shines. So the first one is that with Google Apps Script, you can talk to Google Sheets and pretty much do everything that you can do inside the Google Sheets app, whether it is the Google Sheets web app or the Google Sheets mobile apps. So to give you an example, you can create and edit new spreadsheets. You can read data, you can pull data from spreadsheets. You can apply formulas, conditional formatting. You can even import data from external sources. When I say external sources, it could be a database, it could be an API, or it could be an HTML table somewhere. You can import this data into Google Sheets and store it in Google Sheet and analyze the data here. And it is also possible to export data. So for instance, if you have your data in a Google Sheet, you can export that data into your company's MySQL database or somewhere external database. Now, Google Forms are really popular in our companies, right? And Google Forms work brilliantly with Google Apps Script. So to give you a possible scenario, okay, I have some feedback. People say that I can turn off my video, so just
Yes, Amit, there is a lag in between.
okay. I think I have turned off my video. I hope that helps. So you can have a Google form where people can register for your event. Now, the workflow would be something like this. As soon as somebody submits your Google form, you can trigger a workflow that does multiple things. So to give you an example, that Google form, as soon as somebody submits a Google form, you can send a confirmation email to the form respondent. You can post a message in your company's Slack channel saying that a new member has registered. You can even generate a ticket with the QR code where people at the venue can simply scan that QR code and allow that person in. Or if you are if you are hosting a virtual event like this one, what you can do is as soon as somebody submits a Google form, you can directly add that form respondent to your online meeting, which could be in Zoom or Google Meet. Because all these companies, all these meeting applications, they expose brilliant APIs. And the best part about Google Apps Script is you can talk to any API and do whatever is possible with that API. Google Apps Script makes it really easy for you to work with files and folders in Google Drive, including files that are stored in shared drives of companies. Shared drives were previously known as Steam drives, but I think now they're called shared drives. So to give you an example again, for instance, if an employee joins your company, what the HR team in your company can do is they can run a script that will automatically share a set of files like policy documents and the harassment policies and all these files and folders with the employees, so they can look at the documents as soon as they join your company. You can also write scripts that will automatically back up your important files and folders on a recurring schedule. Similarly, you can write Google scripts that will help you manage sharing access and permissions for files. Now, another example here is, suppose your company works with external vendors, and you have a project that's for say 6 months, and you after 6 months your contract with the vendor ends. So whatever documents you have shared with the external vendor should automatically get unshared so that they stop getting access to those documents. And you can do all this with Google Apps Script. Now, so far, what we have done is we have only discussed using Google Apps Script to connect to various Google services. But there's actually more. Google Apps Script, these can be published as web apps. If you have worked with Lambda functions in Amazon Web Services or even Firebase and Google Cloud Functions, so they are very similar. And these web apps can be invoked by external services. I'll give you a very quick example here. So let's say you're trying to build a payment workflow where as soon as somebody makes the payment and you want to issue an invoice and license and all these things. And this is a perfect use case for using web apps in Google Apps Script. So to build a payment workflow with Google Apps Script, what we can do is, so let's say you are using PayPal or Stripe to process payments. So whenever somebody makes the payment through these services, that payment company will send a HTTP request, which is also known as a webhook, to your Google script saying that we have received the payment. Now, as soon as this webhook is received by the Google script, it can trigger a workflow that will send the invoice. It will generate a license key to the buyer, and also when this license key is activated by the buyer, Google script can also check if that license key is valid. And if you are using a recurring subscription for payment, it can also verify that the buyer has been completing all the payment cycles. So this was, I'm sure that slide gave you some idea of what all possibilities we have with Google Apps Script. These are just some of the use cases. The possibilities are immense. And the more you work with Google Apps Script, the more you will realize the power of Google Apps Script. But that said, what makes Google Apps Script really unique than everything that's out there? So to give you an example, most of us, developers are generally familiar with languages like Node, Python, Java, and so on. So you can obviously build all Google solutions using these platforms. But why would somebody choose Google Apps Script over anything else? And the biggest advantage is that there is a very, very small learning curve, and there is no setup required. All you need is a Google account and you are ready to go. Now, one of the biggest pain points of any application is the authentication and authorization part, and how your application can successfully work on behalf of a user. So to take a scenario here, suppose you are writing a Node application that the job of that application is to show the list of most recent email messages that are in your Gmail mailbox. Now, if you have to write such a simple application using the Node platform, you'll probably spend more time writing the authentication part than the app itself, how your app will connect to Gmail, how it will authorize that connection, and then how it will read the messages. So I think the most of the work would happen in writing that authorization and authentication part. If you're working with Google Apps Script, authentication is built in and it is handled automatically for you. So it's very, very easy to get started. There is absolutely no barrier here. The other advantage of Google Apps Script is that it offers very generous quotas, service quotas. So you can even build production grade applications without having to worry about your budgets or exceeding budgets and so on. For instance, some of my add-ons that I use, they have tens and thousands of users, and they're heavy users. So people are working on those add-ons all the time. Yet I have never come across a situation where they have been unable to work on the add-on because the quota has been exhausted. So Google, in this case, is very generous in offering you quotas. To give you some numbers here, so if you're using the Gmail service of Google Apps Script, you can send up to 1,500 emails per day. If you are creating documents and spreadsheets with Google Apps Script, that limit is up to 2,000 per day. And if you're using Google Apps Script to connect to external APIs, so for instance, you're connecting to PayPal API, to the NASA API, there's so many APIs available, you can make up to 20,000 calls per day, so which is a very, very generous number. Now, these quota limits are obviously different for each service, but they're again pretty generous. And one tip I like to share here is that if you create a project using Google Apps Script and it grows really, really popular, you may even log into your Google Cloud Console and you can request them to increase the read and write request quota for your projects. And my experience has been they're very likely to accept your request. So even if you are exceeding some quotas, you can just request them and they'll try to they'll increase it for you if you have a good track record building projects with them. Now, the other unique part about Google Apps Script is these time-based triggers. And if you work with the cron jobs in Unix or Linux, they're very, very similar. So basically what you can do is you can set up a trigger that will automatically run a desired function or a workflow at a specific date and time. So like you can create a time trigger so if you're working in a company, you're a boss and you're managing a team of say 10 people, you can create a time trigger that will send an email to your entire team requesting them to complete the timesheet. And you can choose to send this timesheet reminder at 5 p.m. on the Friday of every week, right? Or you can set up a time trigger that will back up your important files in Google Drive. And this trigger you can choose to run on the last day of every month or the first day of every month as per your needs. Google Apps Script also supports events, and you can associate workflows that are triggered automatically when an event happens. So these events could be something like you have a spreadsheet, and whenever a new row is added to a spreadsheet, you can say send an email to someone. Or if somebody modifies a cell in a spreadsheet, you can log this to your database so that you can track what has changed in the spreadsheet and when it was changed. Events can also be used to trigger, or events can also be used to monitor Google Form responses. So basically, when somebody submits a Google Form, you can trigger that event will trigger a workflow, and this workflow could be from response to your company's Slack channel, or you may choose to send an SMS message to your team using services like Twilio or MessageBird. And one of the most unique cases of Google Apps Script is that you can also use it to create websites and web applications that are hosted directly on the Google Cloud, and they do not cost a penny. And these web applications that you build with Google Apps Script, they can handle both GET requests and POST requests, and they're very, very easy to build, as we will learn in the later slides. So before we jump into the actual code, let me show you the AppScript ID or the development platform where all this magic happens. So there are a couple of ways to launch the AppScript ID. The easiest is if you go to your browser and just type script.new. So this is the easiest way to launch a Google script. This is one option. The other option is if you're in Google Drive and you have the new button here, if you click on new, go to the more option, and here also you can have the option to launch a Google Apps Script project. This is one. The other more popular option is that let's say you have a Google Sheet. I can create a new sheet by just typing sheet.new. Now, in Google Apps Script language, these spreadsheets, these documents and presentations, these are called containers. And when you create a script that is inside this container, these are called container bound scripts. So for launching a script editor from the sheet, what we do is we go to Tools menu, and here you see an option that says Script Editor. In case this is not visible, I'll slightly zoom it. So you go to the tools menu and then you choose script editor. And this will also launch a script ID. So there are at least 4 different ways to launch the script ID. I've shown you all the 4. Now this is let's work on writing some code. So essentially, Google is JavaScript. So whatever you can do with JavaScript, you as well. And a very short that will give you some idea. So I'll give you this. Let me rename this project to say test. Now here I am writing a new function that will add a greeting to a name. So let's say function was called greet person. Store the value of this word. Let's call this variable person and let's give this a value. I'll give my name. Now this variable has two, the first name and the last name. So let me split this and store these in separate values. I'll use array destructuring for that. So first name, last name. And what I'm doing is I'm splitting this by space. So essentially, this will split this variable, and the first name would be stored in the first name variable, and so is the last name. Now let's create a greeting. So I'll create another variable called greeting, and this will be, I'm using template literals here, which are available in year 6. So this is just JavaScript. There's absolutely no app script involved, and yet I'm writing this inside the app script ID. So how do we know if this is working? What I'll do is I'll use a library called Logger. This is built into app script, and it is used for debugging your programs. It's very similar to the console logs that you could have used in your other programming languages. So I'll just say logger.log and greeting. So this is a very simple program, and let's run this. So how do you run a program in Google Apps Script? First, I will save my changes by pressing this floppy icon. Yeah, now you have a list of functions that are available in your script. So in this case, I just have one person that's called greet person. So I'll choose that person function from this drop down of functions, and I'll choose run. So as soon as I hit run, it evaluates it, and whatever is the output of logger.log, this will be added to my console window. So here is the output of this program. So it's a very easy program, but it gives you the very brief introduction to what the app script IDE can do. Also, everything is running inside the Google Cloud. None of this is running on your computer. So to give you an example, if I create another function that will print the current date and time. So if I say print time, let's create a new variable that says that will hold the current date. This will print the current date. Let's see what is the output of this function. So I'll first save this project. Then I'll choose my new function from this dropdown, which is print time. Let me run this. And you can say that it says the time is 16:54. That is 4:54. The reason why it says this is because my current project has the India time zone associated with it. But that doesn't mean that because my browser has the India time zone, it's showing the India time zone. It's just that my project itself has the India time zone associated to it. So if I go to my settings, project settings, and they have something called a manifest file. Let me open this manifest file first. This is the manifest file. It's called appscript.json, which holds your project the kind of JavaScript that's project is using. So it has a the attribute called time zone, and you see it is currently set to my India time zone. If I change this to say GMT and I save my project, now let's go back to the function and I'll run it again. So now you can see that it is showing the time in the Greenwich time zone. So basically you can decide which time zone your project should work on. So that was a very brief overview of the AppScript ID. Now let's write some real code that will do something useful. So for the first Google script, what we will do is we will write code that will create a Google document in our Google Drive. And in the next part, what we will do is we will email this document to a colleague using the Gmail service that is also part of Google AppScript. So I'll use the same project that I have created earlier, and I'll delete everything. Let me write a new function that will create a document. So let's call this function create document. Now Google AppScript has a service called Document App that you can use to create and work with Google Documents. So it's called Document App. And since we want to create a new document, it's very simple. It's very obvious. The method would be called create. Now, the thing that you have to give here, the first argument is the name of the document, the name that it will store the document in your Google Drive. So I'll just say my first document. Very creative name. I will store the reference to this in a variable called doc. So we have created a document. As soon as I run this function, it will create a new document in my drive, but obviously the document will be empty. So let's also add some content to this document. How do you do that? First, I'll get a reference to the document, the body that will hold the text of this document. So let's create a new variable called body. And this will hold the reference to the body of the document. Now, this is where we play, where we add content to the document. So for first, we'll add some paragraph to this document. So we'll say body.append paragraph. You don't have to remember the documentation of Google AppScript is really, really good. Plus, this ID offers excellent autocomplete. So over time, you will automatically remember all these methods. So I'll say I'm a paragraph. Maybe we can add a horizontal rule to that. So we'll say body.append. Yeah, the function is called append horizontal rule. Let me add another paragraph here. So body.append paragraph. And I'll call it and the second paragraph. So we have created the document, but obviously these changes have not been written to the document. So to write this document, we will have to call another method that will save all these changes and then close this document reference. So we'll say doc.save and close. Okay, let's save this project now. And we'll run this now. So we only have one function, create document. Let's run this now. Now, this is where authorization comes in. So what happens is, because we are trying to create a document in Google Drive, this script requires access to the Google Drive service, the document service. So that is why it requires this access window. I'll choose my Google account, and here it shows me the list of scopes that it requires access to. Now here we are just using the document service to create a document, and that is the reason why it requires access only to the document scope. So I'll click on allow. And the execution has been completed. So my document has been generated. If I go back to my Google Drive, and you can see that a new document has been generated that says my first document. Let's open this. And this has the first paragraph, a horizontal rule, and the second paragraph. So essentially, you have created a first Google script that creates a new document, and you could do it just by writing 6 lines of code. So that's how easy it is to build applications with Google Apps Script. Now, obviously, this is very simple. So let's modify this. Let's try to email the link to this document to a colleague. For emailing, we'll use the Gmail service. That is again part of Google Apps Script. So we'll write another function, email document. I can just take this text and paste it here. Now, whenever you create a document in Google Drive, it has a unique URL associated with it. So how do you get that URL? Obviously, there's another method for it. We'll call it URL. I'll say type.get URL. So this is the URL of the document that gets created in our Google Drives. And how do you send an email? That's again, we use the mail app service. Mail app is a built-in mailing service that is part of Google Apps Script. So you have 2 services through which you can send emails in Google Apps Script. One is the mail app service, and the other is the Gmail app service. Gmail app versus mail app. So which service you should use depends on your organization. There are some organizations, especially schools, where they do not allow access to the Gmail. They have disabled the Gmail application for some of their students. So if you're in such an organization and you still want to mail the files, you can use the mail app service because this is independent of Gmail. And if you have access to Gmail in your Google account, you should use the Gmail app service. I will simply use the mail app service in this example. And mail app has a function called send email. Obvious, name is very obvious, send email. And how do you send an email? First, you provide the name of the email address of the receiver. So I'll say Agnes, this is just a dummy email address. You give it a subject, my first document. And then we have to write the body. So for body, maybe I'll create a new variable where I'll put the body. Here's the doc you asked for. And I'll add the URL to this body. And this will be the 3rd parameter. So this is the send email function, and it just takes 3 arguments: the receiver's email address, the subject, and the body. I'm good. Let's hit the run button. But can you notice something? As soon as I hit run, our body has already been declared. Okay, we'll call it body 2. Now, the good part about this script ID is as soon as you make any syntax error, it won't allow you to save the project, or it won't allow you to run the project. So it's very easy to catch errors while you're coding inside the script ID. Now, as soon as I save this project and run it, you will notice that it requires authorization again. And the reason why this is because in the previous authorization, we only gave access to the document service. But now, because we are using the mail service as well, our project will require authorization to both the document service as well as the mail service. I'll choose my Google account here. And now this is the authorization that we granted it previously, which is the Google Documents, but now it also requires access to the send email service. So I'll click on allow. The mail has been sent. Let me open my Gmail account. And there you can see a mail. So this is how easy it is to, send emails and work with Google Apps Script. Now, there's a question from Josh Setna. They say that how do you send a file as an attachment with the email? Now, this is also possible. For that, what we have to do is, suppose the file is in our Google Drive. So they have a service called Drive App. I'll be discussing this in detail later, but they have a service called Drive app, and then you get the file by the ID. Every file in your Google Drive has an ID. How do you get that ID of the file? So if I right click a file and choose get link, it shows me the link of that file. I'll copy this and I'll go back to my AppScript ID and I paste it here. So this is the whole URL that points to the document, but this cryptic string, this is the ID of the file, and this is unique across the Google universe. So every single document, every single file, or every single folder in Google Drive has a unique ID, and this is how you can get references to any file in your Google Drive. And once you have the reference to that file, you can attach it again using the send email service. Okay. Any other questions you have around this? The first basic tutorial that we had? Okay, I'll move on then. So like all of the programming languages, Google Apps Script has a cache service, but the unique thing is that this cache service is built into AppScript. You don't have to interface with an external service to use caching in your projects. Now, this cache service is very helpful and it helps you store data in key value pairs in your Google Scripts. And as you build new Google projects, you will realize that it is considered a very good practice to cache frequently used data, because once you cache something, any subsequent reads to that data would be much faster, and thus the performance of your Google script would be enhanced. So to give you an example, if you are suppose connecting to an external API, and that API is the data that is served from that API doesn't change very frequently. So it makes sense to cache that data for say 1 hour, 2 hours, so that every subsequent calls to that API would simply hit your cache rather than hitting the external server, and then your projects would be much faster. So I'll give you an example how to use the cache service in your Google Apps Script. I'll delete everything. So let's write a function, store data in cache. The cache service, obviously, the name of the cache service is cache service. And if I hit dot, you can see that there are 3 kinds of cache service stores available inside AppScript. One is the document cache, one is the script cache, and one is the user cache. Now, this can be slightly confusing for new users, but I'll try to explain it in very simple English. Document cache is the cache that is limited to your document. So if there are multiple users of the document, they can access everything that's stored in the cache in the document cache. For script cache, that is limited to your script. So if different people are using that same script, that cache service is available to them. And user cache is obviously it's kind of a private cache. It's only visible to you. Nobody else can read your cache. That's, I think, the primary difference. So to use a service, let's use the script cache for this example. I'll call it cache. We're getting a reference to the script cache. Now, how do you store data in cache? That's very easy. We just say cache.put. We assign a unique name to a cache. Let's call it name, and let's give it a value. Now, it can only take string values. It cannot store JSON, or it cannot store blobs, nothing. It can only take strings. So it's kind of limited, but it's still very useful when you are working on real projects. So I'll put my name here, suppose. Now, because it's a cache service, this is not a permanent cache. This is just temporary storage, and whatever data you put into the cache will expire after some time. Now, it really depends on you for how long you want to save this data. So third parameter for this put function is called the expiration in seconds. So if I say 1, that means this cache data will be staying in the cache only for a second. If I multiply this by 60, obviously this means the cache will be staying alive for 1 minute. Let me add 60, and this is 1 hour. So the maximum is 6 hours. You cannot have more, you cannot extend this beyond the 6-hour period. So let's save this for 6 hours. I've saved it. Let's save this project and let's run it again. So the data has been saved in the cache. Now, if I have to retrieve it again, I can write another function, get data from cache. Now again, I get a reference to the same cache service because the script cache will only be available in script cache. I cannot retrieve this data from document cache or the user cache. Value cache.get, and I have to specify the same key, log value. Let's run this function to get the data from the cache. Yeah. Now, please remember that this is a temporary store. So obviously, after a period of 6 hours, this value will be null. It will not have anything in the cache. So just keep this in mind, but it's still a very, very useful thing to have. And in case you want to remove something from the cache, that's called remove. Very obvious function names they have. Okay. Now, similar to the cache service, we also have something called the property store in Google Apps Script. And this is like having a permanent data store where you can again store data in key value pairs. Now, again, this is the property store that's built into Google Apps Script is not a replacement or not a substitute for any real database, because you can only store few kilobytes of data. But this is still a very useful thing for storing, say, user preferences, or for storing service API credentials, something like API keys and so on. Also, each script will have its own store, and the availability will depend on the type of store that you select. Again, when I say the type of store, I mean the document service, the property service, or the user property service. Let's take an example again here. So now we are storing data inside the property store, and unlike the cache, this is stored permanently. So let's write a function that says store data in property store. First, we get a reference to our property store. Props is equal to property service dot get script properties. Now, how do you decide which properties the service you should use? So if I press dot here, you can see again, like the cache service, you have three services available: the document properties, script properties, and user properties. Now, the thumb rule is very simple. If you're trying to store some settings that should be accessible to users, all users of a current Google document, you should use the document properties store. If you're trying to store data that should be accessible to all users of a script, so for instance, you are storing API keys, this should go in the script properties. And for user properties, we will use something that is specific to a user, something like user preferences. So for instance, somebody prefers a dark mode in their browser, somebody prefers a light mode. So this is a user preference, and such settings should always be stored in the user properties. So let's write properties and let's save a property. How do you do dot? Even if you forget the function name, just press dot and it will auto-complete. So I'll say set property, I'll give it a name and give it a value. Now the thing is that there's no expiration here, because this is like permanent and it will stay around forever. I'll show you one more trick, because like the cache service, here also you can only store text values. You cannot store JSON objects or anything. But in case you have a complicated object, something like so suppose you have a person object that has a lot of attributes, key value pairs, and you want to store everything into the property store, but in one property rather than saving these in multiple properties. So what you can do is you can obviously stringify this data. So all I will say is props.set person, and this will go as JSON.stringify person. Now we are storing bulk of data in one property by simply stringifying everything. Tomorrow, if you want to retrieve this data, you will again say const value equal to props.get property, and we'll pass the same key. Key important. Now, but this will return a string. So you can again use the JSON service to parse it, and it will return a JSON object. So this is one trick that programmers, Google Apps Script developers frequently use to store large values in the property service of Google Apps Script. Any questions so far? Okay. Now we looked at a very simple example of sending emails in the creating a document and then sending an email. Now let's build a slightly more advanced Google script that will read data from a Google Sheet. This is a very common use case for among Google App Script users. So you read data from a Google Sheet, you do something with that data, and you also write back to the sheet what you have done with that data. So let's build something like that. So in this example, what we'll do is uh, I have a spreadsheet. Let me quickly fill this with some dummy data. Name, country. So I have some dummy data here, and the task that I have to complete is that I have to take this data and send email to every row that is in the Google Sheet. So first thing I'll do is I'll quickly create the name, the subject field. And for this, I'll use some formulas. Maybe let me format this first. So I'll go to format, alternate colors. So I'll probably use this yellow color. This looks. Yeah. Let me change the font as well. And maybe make this vertically center. Okay. Yeah, looks better. So first thing we'll do is we'll create a subject. So subject line would be, I'll use the formula concat for that. I'll just put the first name, which is the A2. So that's my subject line.
Um, uh, Amit, hi, we lost you in between. Uh, uh, Attendees, I think there is some technical issue at the speaker end. Be online, he will be there in few seconds.
Hello, can you hear me? I'm sorry, this got disconnected for some
Uh,
reason.
yes, Amit, we can hear you.
Yeah, sorry, very sorry about that. So what I have is a spreadsheet, and this is a very simple spreadsheet that has a couple of rows. It has the email address, the subject, and the message body. And the job of this spreadsheet is to send emails to every single row in this spreadsheet. So how do we do that? Now, if you remember, I talked about standalone scripts and containers-based scripts. So this is going to be a container script because this is bound to the current spreadsheet that we are working on. So how do we access the app script ID for this container? We just go to the tools menu and then we'll choose script editor. Yeah, here we have the script editor. Let me give this some unique name, maybe send emails. Now, before I look into the code, let me tell you something about spreadsheets in general. So the way the Google spreadsheets are structured is that you have a spreadsheet, and then you have sheets inside a spreadsheet. So if you are working in the Microsoft Excel Word, you probably call them workbooks, but here we call them sheets. So like this is called sheet one. I can probably rename this to something like employees, and then I can have multiple sheets. So this is how the worksheet structure is inside Google Spreadsheets. Now, once you know this, let me go to the script associated with this sheet and get a reference to the current spreadsheet. So how do you do that? Let's call this SS, which is spreadsheet, and we use the spreadsheet app service, and we get a reference how get active spreadsheet. So this is my spreadsheets. The spreadsheet is the container that is bound. The script is bound to this spreadsheet, right? Now this spreadsheet will have multiple sheets. So how do we get them? We'll say sheets is equal to ss dot get sheets, obviously. Now this will return an array, and this array will have every single spreadsheet, every single sheet or workbook that is part of this spreadsheet. Now we are only interested in the first sheet of this spreadsheet. So what I can do here is I can just say get sheets, and then I can reference the first element of this array. That's one way to access the first spreadsheet. But obviously there's a problem with this approach, because tomorrow if I move this spreadsheet to the second position, my program would fail. So to get around this problem is we'll not use the get sheets function. We'll use another function, and that is called get sheet by name. This is my. So now this will return me the reference to the spreadsheet that has my data. Next, my next task is to read the data that is inside this. So first we will get the range of cells that has the data. So in this case, it has the data inside the cell A1 and goes on until E4. So what I can do is I can either specify this range A1 to E4. The other option is Google Scripts offer another function, and that is called data range. So I can just say const range is equal to sheet.get data range. And this will automatically have the range where you have data in the cell. So the range that it will return is A1 to E4. It will not have F1 or anything like that, because it will only look at cells that have data and accordingly return a range. But once we have the range, we need to get the values also of this range. So how do you do that? We say const values equal to range dot get values. Now this is the part that we are interested in, the values, because this will return all the values that are inside the spreadsheet that we have to work on. Now, how do we inspect what values are returned by the spreadsheet? We can obviously, let me save this. We can either add a breakpoint here, So when we add a breakpoint, it works just like every other programming development environment. Automatically, when we debug the function, the execution will stop at this, allowing us to inspect the values. That's one way. The other way is we can add a debugger statement here. When we add a debugger statement, there is no need for breakpoints, and automatically the function processing will pause at this point. So let's see how this works. What are the values that are stored in the values function? I'll click this debug button first. I'll save my changes first and then click on the debug button. Now again, it requires permissions because I'm requesting data from a spreadsheet. So it should require permissions to the spreadsheet scope. There you have, it requires permissions to my spreadsheets. I click on allow. So this is how you debug applications inside the Google Apps Script IDE. If I look into the right sidebar, the debugger sidebar, you have a local variable called values. If I click this arrow to expand this, you can see that it's an array of arrays, and the first value will obviously point to the first row, which is the header row. You have the column titles here. I'm not interested in them. I'm only interested in the data that is in row 1, 2, and 3, or row 2, 3, and 4. Yeah. Okay, let's stop this. So I'm getting the values now. My next job is to send emails to all to these rows. So how do you do that? We iterate over these values. So let's write a for loop, a very simple loop. For let I equal to 0. I will not begin from I equal to 0. I'll start from I equal to 1 because the first row has the column headers and I'm not interested in them. I'm only interested in data from row 2 onwards. That's why I'm starting my loop from I equal to 1. Let's get the current row. This will be values.I. This will return me an array of the entire row. And if you can look at this sheet, the email address is in the third column, or if you look at arrays, this is the second index, then the subject, and then the message body. So I can simply write another function called mail app, send email. The first is the email address. The email address is in the third column, so it's the second row in second index in arrays, row 2. The subject is in the next one, so it says row 3. So basically what we're doing is we are iterating through all the data in the spreadsheet and we are sending emails one by one. We can also add some sort of debugging statements, console statements here, so we can know at least what the script is doing. So we can just say email send to plus row 2. So let's run this function now. First, let me save it. And let's run this now. Obviously, it requires authorization because I am adding the mail sending scope here, which was not previously authorized. Click allow. You can see that it has sent emails to all the 3 recipients. And if I go to my inbox, you can see that the mails have been sent. Obviously, the mails returned because these were dummy email addresses, but this is how the mails look like. They have been sent from the spreadsheet. So this was a very basic script, but there are a couple of problems with the script that I just wrote. Now, suppose later if I want to add one more row here, maybe Jacob. Now, if I have add another row and I go here and I run the same script, what it will do is it will start from the row 2 onwards. Again, it will reprocess all the rows. In other words, it will send duplicate emails to the people who have already been sent emails. So we need some sort of a mechanism to track whether the emails have been sent or not. And if an email has been sent to a particular row, we will skip it in the next iteration. So let's modify our code to do that. We will add a new column here and let's call it email status. And if an email has been sent, we will have a value that says mail sent here. Since we have already sent values here, so we'll just put mail sent here. And when we run this script now, it should look at this email status column. In case the value is not blank, then it should send an email, otherwise it should skip the row. So we'll go here again. And here we will add one logic here that says if row, the value here is in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is the column 6, which is 5 in arrays. We'll only send emails if this value is blank. We'll make one more change to the script. We will also write this value mail sent once an email has been sent. So how do you do that? I'll just get the reference to the sheet, then get the range. We'll basically point to the range of this cell where we want to populate the status value. So we'll say get range. We'll write the row value. Row is this. So row I has the row number, which is I plus 1, because get range, these are 1 based indices, not 0 based indices as is popular in other programming languages. For column, this column is 6th column, so we'll say 6 and we'll say set the value as mail sent. So as soon as a mail is sent, this column will automatically be populated. So the next time we run this, our spreadsheet will skip that row. We'll make one more change. Whenever we write something to a spreadsheet, that is, we have to flush those changes into the spreadsheet as well. So for that, we have a function called spreadsheet.flush to apply the changes and whatever write changes we make to the spreadsheet. This looks good. Let me try running this again and see what happens. Yes, this is completed. This has been populated with mail sent and all the other rows were skipped. So this is a very simple thing, but it shows you how you can read data from a spreadsheet and how you can write data from a spreadsheet. Now, the other problem with this approach is that every time you have to run the script, you have to go in the tools menu and the script editor and then run a script. So if you have a non-technical member in your team, it might take some time for him or her to understand this. So what we can do is we can simply add a menu here that will make them, that will allow them to run the script without having to look into the script editor. So for that, we have a special function inside Google Script, and that's called onOpen. OnOpen, as the name indicates, this is the first function that will run whenever your spreadsheet is opened by any user. And what we want to do in this onOpen function is we want to add a menu here. And this menu item will appear somewhere near the help menu. So how do you do that? First, we grab the UI, the spreadsheet UI, and then here we create a menu. Let's call this send emails. Maybe we can also add some emoji here. And we have a menu here. Now we want to add a function to this menu. So we'll say add item, start. Now the next parameter for add item specifies the function name that you want to run when this menu is clicked. Now, in this case, I want to run this function that is called my function. I think I'll rename it to something like send emails. So what I want to do is I want to run this function whenever somebody clicks the start menu. So I'll go here and set this to send emails. So the menu has been created, but it has not been added to the UI yet. So for that, we'll just say add to UI. Now, whenever somebody opens this spreadsheet, this menu will automatically get added here. I can just show you here. I'll save the changes. I'll click on run. And you can see that a new function, I'm sure you can see this function, new menu item called send email has been added here. And I can click on start to run this script. So that's one way to expose your Google script to people who are non-technical so that they can use menu items to execute complex functions. The other approach is we can add a button here. So I go to my insert menu and then I'll choose drawing. Here what I'll do is I'll go to the shapes menu and then maybe I'll add a button. And this button will have some name, maybe say send emails. I can resize this. Looks good, and I'll save and close. This button has been added here. Now, obviously, this button doesn't do anything, right? But what we want is whenever people open this spreadsheet, they should see this button, they should click this button, and automatically emails should go out that are available in the spreadsheets. So how do you do that? You see a little three-dot menu here. Just click on this menu, and you have an assign a script button. So click on this. And here it will ask you the name of a function that you want to execute whenever this send emails button is pressed. So if you remember, we call that function send emails. So we'll just copy that function name, go here and paste it. Now, whenever this button is pressed, automatically that function will be run. So there are so many ways to run scripts. You can use buttons, you can use menu items to run scripts, or for more advanced users, you can directly go into the app script ID, make the changes and run the code from here. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay. I'll show you one more interesting feature of Google Apps Script, and that is how you can create custom functions that run inside Google Apps Script. So for that, I'll create a new spreadsheet. And the job of this spreadsheet is to allow you to convert currencies. So to give you an example, let's say the current price of USD is say $75. And I want to write a function that converts. So I enter an amount that says 12. This is in INR. And I want this is the USD. And I want this function to convert my USD currency to INR. So obviously, the thing is that you will use this thing and multiply it with whatever average rate you have, 75, and you get this. But that's not the approach we are going to take here. What we want to do is we want to write a custom function that will create a new function. Like say you can use functions like upper, lower, and so on in Google Sheets. We can similarly write a new function in Google Script for currency conversion. So how do you do that? Again, we'll go to the script menu. And here we'll write a function that says USD to INR. And this will have an argument, which is the amount in INR. And we'll return something like return amount in INR multiplied by some rate, 75. So what this function is a very basic JavaScript function. It takes some value, multiplies that with 75 and returns a value. So if I go to my spreadsheet and here, if I type USD to INR and then A2, which is 12, press enter, nothing happens. Why? Because there is no function called USD to INR. Probably I forgot to save this. Let me save this. I'll go back, and you can see that it's loading now. And I hopefully, let's try this again. USD to INR, and then I'll say 122. Okay, the reason why this is not working probably is because we have not defined this function as a custom function yet. And how do you do that is you have to add comments to this function in JSDoc format. Now, obviously, some programmers probably know this, but this is how you do it. You start with a slash, and then you specify what this function does. You say that this function converts USD to INR. Oh, sorry, this is not USD. This function converts USD to INR, and because this is a custom function, we'll add this hint for Google Sheets to know that this is a custom function. Now it should be available inside the list of formulas that are available in autocomplete inside Google Sheets. Now this function just takes one parameter, and the type of that parameter is a number. And what is this? This is an amount in USD. And what does it return? It again returns a number. The type of that return is again a number. And what is that? It's amount in INR. Let me save this. I'll go back. Now you can see some magic if it works. USD, you can see, yeah, it works now. So as soon as I type USD, you know, that function that we just created inside Google Script, that is available in our autocomplete. And whatever value I provide here, 23.323, I press enter. It's giving some error, I'm not sure. Amount, no, sorry, this is my problem. Amount in USD. Yeah, so it could convert that USD amount into INR. So if you have multiple values in different rows, you can just use this formula to automatically convert. And if you change the function here, automatically all those values will be updated. Now this works so far, but obviously this is not the best approach. And the reason being that it has a static conversion factor, right? This is not dynamic. If the value may change tomorrow. So for that, what we can do is we can make use of some currency API that will grab the current value from the exchange, and then we'll use that in our function. Where do we get this? There is a service called free currency API.net. Now this gives you the current currency rates. So what you can do is we can grab this data, we can grab this URL. Let's see what returns. What data does it return? So it returns the rates of USD with respect to different currencies, and this is for the current date. So what we can do is we can make use of this data to grab the data in our Google Sheet. How do we grab the data in our Google Sheet? We use a function that is called URL fetch. This is a built-in service of Google Apps Script that allows you to connect to external APIs and grab the data. So we can say grab URL.fetch, and then we provide the URL. This is the URL of the API. So essentially what we are doing is we are making a connection to the external API to grab the data, and then whatever data it returns, we can get that by simply using the get context text of this function that returns the data that is returned by the API. I can store that in a variable, and I can use JSON parse to parse the data that is returned by the currency API, and accordingly make this function dynamic. So every time the currency rates changes, we can grab the latest data and show it in our function. So I think we have 15 minutes left for the session, and I have a lot of work to show, so I'm not sure I will be able to do that. So let's do one thing. Let's switch to a Q&A round, and where you can ask questions if you have any about the capabilities and how we can do certain stuff. Probably we'll spend the next 10-15 minutes doing that, and if we still have time and if people want to continue, we can continue with the slides. But I think let's switch to the Q&A now.
Yeah, to all the attendees, you can use the raise hand option to talk to Amit directly. Amit, also we have some questions in the chat box as well as in the
Yeah,
Q&A.
yeah. Okay. I'm looking at the chat box. Just give me a second.
Yeah.
Okay. So this question came around an hour ago, but I'll take it now. Can the payment automation be done for Google Pay in India? Um, Probably yes, but I'm not sure if Google Pay exposes APIs. But what I know is that if you are using Google Pay through a payment service like Razor Pay, then it can be automated using Google App Script. Okay. Is there any service in AppScript to send SMS? So there is no service in AppScript that allows you to send SMS, but there is a company called Twilio, and they are the same company that have the popular SendGrid service for sending emails. So they allow you to send SMS to probably any country in the world. Obviously, it is not a free service, and it is really expensive to send SMS to other countries, like not to US and Canada, but other countries. It's obviously an expensive option, but it's fairly reliable. And if you've been using American tech companies that send you OTPs over phone, they probably send you through Twilio SMS. So you can directly integrate that Twilio with Google Apps Script and add SMS capabilities in your apps. Abhilash Alex asks which scripting language is being used here. This is obviously Google Apps Script, which is a version of JavaScript. Doesn't have all the capabilities of JavaScript, but still it's very familiar up to people who have an understanding of JavaScript. Shivangi asks, yes, sir, this Google scripting will only work for Google Office, or it can be useful for MS Office too. So the thing is that Google scripting language is designed for Google Apps, but if you have documents that you have created in Microsoft PowerPoint or Microsoft Excel sheets, what you can do is you can import them into your Google Drive in Google Doc format. You can do that with Google Apps Script itself and then work on them. So it's not possible to work on a Google Doc in a document that is in PowerPoint or Excel format, but you can import them into Google Docs and then work on them. So do you have any app that documents the conversation of two persons? I'm sorry, Suresh, I didn't get this question. Is there an API for fetching stock from NSE or BSE? Yes. You actually, Google Sheets has a built-in function called Google Finance. I don't remember the syntax right now, but it's called Google Finance. And you can just type a ticker name here. I think it's, let's say NYSE, NSFT. So this is like for Microsoft, I guess. Let's see what happens. I don't remember the exact ticker names, but this is how you have built-in support for stock symbols inside Google Sheets itself. So once you have the data inside Google Sheets, you can use the Google Spreadsheet, Google APIs to read this data and then do whatever you want with that data. Okay, I am done with the Q&A, the chat. Is there anything in the Q&A as well?
At least you can also use the raise hand option in case you have a longer question or to talk to him directly for your doubts.
Okay, this is an interesting question here. Josh Setna asks, What's the difference between threads and messages in Gmail app? Now, this is obviously a very confusing thing for new developers, and it's important you know the difference. So the way Gmail organizes emails in Gmail is through threads, which is equivalent to conversations that you have in Outlook. So for instance, if I send you an email and you respond to that email and then a conversation happens, that entire that all those messages would be saved in one thread, and that thread itself can have one or more messages. So whenever you are using the Gmail API to search messages in your Gmail mailbox, it's always the threads that will be returned, and then you have to parse individual messages inside those threads. Okay. Suresh, I didn't understand your question that says, do you have any app that documents the conversation? I could not understand this. Yeah. Is there any developer view or and user view separately? So the app script ID, I think you were talking about, this is only visible to the developer. This is not visible to the end user. Does that answer your question, or are you asking something else? Okay, perfect. Yeah. So I had a couple of more practical solutions planned for this session, but unfortunately, due to the paucity of time, I cannot cover them here, but maybe sometime again. But I'll quickly walk you through the possible use cases that I had in mind. So one was triggers in Google Drive. So basically, you have files in your Google Drive, and you want to back up files every week or every month. You can do that with Google Drive and triggers in AppScript. Similarly, as I was talking about threads and messages in Gmail app, you can have a very clean mailbox with AppScript. So for instance, if I know a lot of developer teams get a lot of emails that are BCC to them, and they have no option but to no, they cannot remove themselves from those emails. So what you can do is you can write a clean script utility that will automatically look at such emails that arrive, and if an email is older than 7 days, you can automatically move them to your trash and keep your inbox clean. That is one possible use case. You can also write custom templates and reply to your emails, archive emails. I mean, Google Script is used by a lot of developers to keep their mailboxes clean and small, because you have to pay after you reach a certain threshold in storage. Web apps is a very useful topic, but I cannot cover it now because of lack of time, obviously. Similarly, you can use Google Script to build APIs. One of the interesting APIs that I built earlier was to use Google Scripts as a language translation service. So what happens is Google has a language translation service, but that is a paid option, and you have to pay for every call that you have to make an API. But as a workaround, what they have is they have a language translation service built into Google Apps Script as well. So we can build an API around that. So anybody can make calls to that API, and you won't have to pay Google Cloud for using those APIs. And so that's pretty much it from my side. These are my coordinates in case anybody wants to follow me. And you can have my email address as well. It's just amit@labnol.org. And you can shoot me an email. And if I can answer your question, I'll be happy to help.
Amit, there is a raise hand option from Ekonto Ghosh. So I'm just allowing him to talk.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, please go ahead with your question, Ekonto.
I think he's muted.
Yeah, you're yes, yes.
Hello, hi Amit. Thank you so much for the session. My quick question was, if you could quickly guide us as to how custom PDFs can be emailed to various, like you showed us the email option from the spreadsheet. So is there any way, like how the attachments, like we have a template for a certificate, and the person's name just gets embedded in the certificate and gets emailed? I'm sure that is possible, but if you could guide a little on that bit.
So the gist is that you have a certificate template and you want to take data from a spreadsheet, fill that template with that custom data and send it in an email as a PDF. Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So it's very, very difficult to answer that over this 5-minute thing. But the gist is that you have a template, you make a copy of the template. Okay. Suppose that template is in Google Slides. So you just make a copy of that Google template. And then in the copy, you replace all the variable fields with the data from your spreadsheet and then save that template. So essentially it will be a new presentation that you want to email. Now, Google Script has certain APIs that will allow you to download a presentation as a PDF file. So you do that conversion and then finally use the Gmail service to mail that PDF to anyone. That's how it works. But obviously, it's not so simple as I have explained. It will, but you can probably find a lot of built-in applications that do that, I guess, in case you don't want to do it from scratch.
Right. That really helps. Thank you so much, Amit.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ekanto. So we still have 3 minutes left. In case somebody has a doubt or quick question, please go ahead. If not, we can end the session now.
Can we get these slides? Yeah, I'll try to email them, but there's not much in these slides, but still I'll try to. Okay.
All right, Amit, I believe you can switch on your video.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you, Amit, for such a wonderful session. I'm sure a lot of our viewers online and attendees here in the Zoom platform had many questions, but this 1.5 hour is not sufficient for this complete topic, the domain that we have selected. But I'm sure you have tried your best to finish the maximum thing possible. So thank you, Amit. It was a great learning for me as well, and to all our viewers for this session. Thank you again, and we definitely look forward to do many more such sessions with you whenever time compels. But thank you so much, Amit.
Thank you again for inviting, and everyone have a wonderful day. Thank
It's
you
a
so much.
pleasure. It's a pleasure. To all the attendees, you can please